Hey guys, how's it going? Jason Sensational here. Welcome back to the channel, where today we're just going to have a quick video discussing my lineup for the seasonal tournament, what my overall plan is with that lineup, and a look at some matchup tables, and just look where it's falling, where the strategy aims, what I'm expecting, and what I hope to not really run into. So let's jump right into it. So the first deck we have here, I think is to no one's surprise, I am bringing Cannon Ahri. This is the Go Hard version, and it's probably the most standard version that has been running around these days. This is the list that has been popularized by Kever24. He's the first person who really just, innovated adding the Mourned into Cannon Ahri, having 3 sign in 2 God Willows, things like that. But this deck is fairly standard and extremely powerful. Probably the best performing deck, I would say, in the meta currently, and I expect it to be the best deck going into open rounds as well. If you can play this deck well, I think you should always be bringing this deck. No matter the lineup, this will always have a spot within it just because of its sheer power level. There are just a few exceptions you could make. This version is on 2 Notifies and 3 Denies. You could do like 3 Notifies and 2 Denies. This is like a 1 flex slot. You could add in like the Fae Tasty Folk. If you want to be a little bit better in aggro, there are a few flex spots here, but I think this is the standard list that Kever, my teammate, has been running. This is a list that I think most of my team members are running as well, and so I will trust in them and bring it myself. But overall, very powerful deck, does very powerful things, level up Ahri, smack your opponent with elusives, have 3 sign-ins so you never run out of cards and you can pack people's bags, play out a very long, drawn-out control game, and just get there. The second list we have here is Zoe Lee Sin. Maybe a bit of a shocker, probably not to anybody. Zoe Lee Sin has been performing extraordinarily well in the past seasons leading up to the seasonals. I think bit by bit it's coming back out of the shadows, and it's just really been showing just as an incredible power level as piloted by some of the highest skill level players out there in the game. And it doesn't really have as many weaknesses as I think people might expect it to have. I think a big reason why it was so unprevalent early on in this season in particular was because of Shellfolk. Now that Shellfolk's been nerfed, a lot of decks that majority of like and some other Bandle City support cards as well, like the draw card, whatever, I forgot the name of it. But a lot of Bandle City decks have been hit, and so as we see people shifting away from Bandle City decks, those that had the Aloof Travelers, the Mini Morphs, the Shellfolk, Zoe Lee Sin has been slowly creeping back into the meta. And I think it is currently also probably one of the strongest decks out there right now. I think it has a few counters being like Bandletree, maybe like Darkness, like Kindred Viego even. But outside of that, this will beat up most control decks, most aggro decks, and most Demacia mid-range decks out there as well. Um, Overall, very solid, very powerful. If you this is also just another comfort pick. I've played Lee Sin in I think the last 2 seasons leading up to this one, so definitely a deck I'm very solid with, and I think will do really well as well. And for the last one, we have something a little bit spicier, but something that is not unfamiliar to the channel because I did highlight it earlier. This is Thrash Asol. This is a list that my teammate Jordan, What Am I, has created, and it is quite the deck. This is very reminiscent of old target control style decks. This one with a lot more SI control tools, not really the Allegiance version. But you'll notice some big cards, big hitter cards, 3 Vengeances, 1 Sunburst, 1 Piercing Whale, 3 Withering Whales, 3 Vile Feast. Just a lot of removal against some of these smaller unit decks with Withering Whale or Vile Feast, and a lot of single target removal with Vengeances, Piercing Darkness, Sunburst, even the Ruination. It can very easily clog up both wide and tall decks. Our units do very well to just gum up early board states, having quite an early curve with 1 drops and a lot of 2 drops. And our units aren't very big. They aren't trying to win us the game. This is mainly a control deck until we drop Thrash, either level Thrash or just flip Asol. Either way, we have the tools to stay on the board, and we have the tools to keep our opponent's board thin. Now, of course, with any target as side deck, we do have 3 copies of Star Shaping, as well as 2 copies of Atrocity. These are definitely some of our finisher cards will find us what we need to close out the games, but overall, just a very, very solid SI control deck overall. And that's the lineup. Let's talk a little bit about where I see this as a matchup spread, what I'm really aiming to beat up, and what I really hope I don't see as much. Alright, so unfortunately this site does not have stats for either Lee Sin or Thrash Acel. This is all Masters data, so Lee Sin and Thrash Acel, Thrash Acel even less, don't really have the stats back up in Masters, so you just got to trust me on this one, from my own personal experience and what I expect to beat. So let's just first look at we'll go down this list because these are probably the most popular decks played in Masters Ladder. And we'll just go down the list and see where the greens align and see where the reds align. So the first one here is Darkness. So Darkness is pretty close to even. Lee Sin definitely struggles a little bit more against Darkness, but the Thrash Acel deck does quite, in my experience, it does quite okay. We have a lot of late game to kind of go toe to toe. We have a lot of spell shielded units, Acel, the things off of Star Shaping. Thrash can challenge with like gems or pale cascade on like the champions, things like that. We can go pretty toe to toe. We have a lot of removal for the champions, things like that. And so this one's overall is a little bit flippy. It's probably close to a ban. If this is like maybe like the second or third ban out there. But Darkness overall is pretty alright to us. We can definitely beat it if we wanted to. But going forward, Ken and Ahri. So the very first thing is Ken and Ahri is always the ban. If I see Ken and Ahri in a lineup, I think there is almost no doubt that I am banning Ken and Ahri, simply because Lee Sin and Thrash Acel just completely crumble to Ken and Ahri, especially against a very good player at it. It's just not really good matchup. So even if I always win the mirrors, I will always ban Ken and Ahri, regardless of what happens. Misfortune Quinn, this one is quite poor for Ken and Ahri, although I think it's a little bit closer to even if you are very good at piloting the deck. Overall, Lee Sin, I think, even beats Scouts, and Thrash Acel at least does quite okay into. We have a lot of removal. We have the Piercing Darknesses, the Vengeance, the Sunburst. Misfortune will never live, and so it's just a matter of staying onto board and stabilizing. Overall, I think I'm pretty happy playing into Scouts. The funny thing with Scouts is I think Scouts feeds into some matchup or lineups that we're often or not good into. Like maybe it's Scouts plus double Demacia, which we're pretty good into, but a little less of that, and we'll go over just straight up matches first before we talk about a little bit more of a spread. Pike or Rek'Sai, Lurk overall I think should be pretty alright. I don't really know how much Lurk is gonna be played, but and Ahri does really well into it. Lee Sin does pretty fine into it. Thrash Acel does okay too. Boros is going to be poor for our Lee Sin as well as our Thrash Acel. It's definitely a ban that or a deck that I expect to ban if I do see it, but we'll see when it comes up. So the main focus of our lineup is really looking to beat up on the Pantheon decks. So Ken and Ahri already has a very good matchup table into Taric Pantheon or even the Shyvana Pantheon deck. Lee Sin, for the same reasons that Ken and Ahri has a good matchup into it, also has a good matchup. You have the stuns, you have the denies, you have the recalls, you have the Lee Sin kick to recall your opponent's stuff, you have the hushes, you have ways of stopping Pantheon. If you line up everything right, it should always go your favor. And also the Thrash Acel deck. 3 Vengeances, 1 Ruination, 1 Sunburst. A lot of anti-Pantheon sort of cards in there. We have 2 Hushes, we have 3 Solari Priests. We're just really aiming to beat up on Taric Pantheon, which I do expect to be one of the strongest tournament decks out there for most people to pick up. Outside of the Taric Pantheon decks, another lineup that we're pretty solid into is just aggro across the board. So if we see here, we have Fizz Lulu, Ken and Ahri is already 55 into it. If we scroll over to the right a little bit into some of the other aggro decks, we see Raven Rumble, quite favored. Sivir Auction, not an aggro deck, but still Demacia, quite favored. Diana Nocturne, even, but I assume, you know, if you're a good pilot, quite favored. Lulu, Ahri, ooh, that's seeing stats, that's pretty cool. But overall, all the aggro decks, and Ahri is quite favored into, which Lee Sin is also very favored into if you've been familiar with the deck following for a couple seasons. And Thrash Acel, Triple Whale, there's no way these aggro decks are getting past us. Spiders, nope. Pirates, nope. We are crushing them. You'll absolutely out heal them and just crush aggro as a whole. Some of the more control stuff, I don't like some of these stats might be a little misleading, but overall we have Ionia with denies, things like that, and we have obliterates and go big with Targon. So for a lot of control decks, we can offer not either just deny their control game plan or go even bigger than them. The overall spread here is just beating up on Pantheon and being fine into aggro decks. Overall, I'm playing two very solid decks, being Lee Sin and Ahri. The Thrash Acel one's a little bit more experimental, something that I'm not completely sure on, but I'm very familiar with Target Invoke as a whole, played a lot during the Aphelios days, so that sort of game plan and playstyle I'm very familiar with. I've done quite well as I've picked it up this season. I'm relatively confident with it overall. But I expect there to be a good amount of Pantheon. I expect it to be a good amount of an Ahri, and I expect there to be a good amount of aggro because I think what we've seen last week in the Master Runeterra tournament when Finny took it down with double aggro, Spiders, Pirates, Ken, Ahri, beating up all the Pantheon players, we have good matchups into Pantheon and we have good matchups into aggro. And we always ban Ken and Ahri, so we don't ever need to worry about that. Across the board, we're just playing very strong power level decks. So even if we run into, these 50-50 matchups, pilot difference comes into play. I'm just a better player than my opponent, and that's just how it works. But overall, just playing very high power level decks, even if I match up in I don't know about or I have never seen before, because in seasonal open rounds, you're going to be facing a lot of these people who don't, or might be playing like these homebrews, might be playing their decks that they're super comfortable with, but you've never seen them being played before. And just having solid, strong decks to just beat them going toe to toe is very important. So nothing out of the ordinary with my lineup. I think it's a very common lineup again. The Kennen Ahri, the Zoe Lee Sin, as well as the Thrash Acel. Just three very strong decks. Nothing like trying to hard target certain things. I'm not trying to just target focus on Kennen Ahri. Those strategies don't really appeal to me. I'd rather just ban the best deck and bring three solid decks myself. And I think for any of you looking, thinking about your own lineup, that's sort of the same advice I would give to you. I think open rounds is a little bit too early to just target down on a certain kind of deck. Maybe you're rewarded if you run into them 9 times in a row. But other than that, I would be a little bit cautious. Just bring very strong decks with high power levels across the board. Have a little bit of a plan like me, beating up aggro, banning Ken and Ahri, and beating up Pantheon. As long as those are probably the three main ones you need to keep in mind. Control, you can just a little bit more in the back of your head. What's my plan to control? But overall, this is my lineup. This is the lineup I'm going to be rocking for the seasonals with. I wish you luck to everyone playing in seasonals, the best, and I'll catch you guys on Sunday. I'll post up all of the seasonal stuff there. I probably skip Sunday or Saturday. We'll see. I'll be playing, so probably no video then. But again, thank you guys so much for tuning into the channel. Really appreciate it. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Good luck again, and have a good day.